Hi there, we're back to Polkadot, and besides the usual Wyckoff and the resistance and support levels, we're going to add in a new perspective, the Wyckoff inside daily chart. So let's dive in. We already talked about Polkadot has exhibited a behavior that hasn't been observed in other altcoins. This particular low point set in mid-late June was actually lower than any other points during the accumulation cycle between 2020 all the way to current time. So that's a very worrying situation, I would say, for some people, because it's like, is it dying down? If the if the project itself or the development teams themselves are still running smoothly and they're still getting sufficient, I say, adoption, yeah, so then the project will continue. If that's the background, then this shouldn't be that worrying. However, if there are factors that signals Polkadot is not relevant anymore, then we have to reassess its like whether this is signaling something very serious happening. So back to here, after the test, we are likely to expect some rebound. Not sure how high that would be, but that's probably because this green isn't that high as well. I mean, the volume not as high as this where we attacked sign of strength. So we hopefully will see some more green bars, like maybe consecutive green bars similar to here, for the coming weeks. So while it's still in the accumulation stage, it's normal we see some kind of patterns like this over here. That's the big picture. So it's like a fluctuation period, and then going to the daily. Okay, I haven't cleaned up this. So this downward trend, hopefully it will be clear out if this candle is going to successfully close above the white line. So last week we talked about it has to break out of this triangle, right? So it did. It broke to the downside and like being suppressed for a few days and re-entered the above the white line over here, but then yesterday and the day before it came back again. Now it's trying to regain the position. If it fails, then this downward trend would still hold true, because currently I have drawn this trend a little bit conservative to the inwards, to the inside. If I include the wicks of these candles, currently it's still within the downward trend. So that gives us how or where it is now in terms of Polkadot from a daily perspective. So in the beginning I talked about let's inject some additional elements to the daily chart, because one of you asked for it, like seeing the Wyckoff in the lower level timeline. So I'm going to add it now. Daily is probably my current the current craziest thing I would do for now, because usually I just keep it for the weekly, because that way it's easier to understand the big picture, and the big guys, the whales, normally do things in the macro scale, so it's easier to see at that timeline. In the daily, we can still draw it for the fun and for research or discussion purpose, so let's get started. Okay, so I need to borrow something somewhere. Let's pick this one. Let's change the color, and let's say we start with fine climax. I always love to see the highest points. So let's zoom in a little here. Let's say this was the bind climax for this mini cycle. And then I'll skip some of the text like the automatic reaction, because it will become too busy on a daily chart if we put in all the text. Let's say we have a second test, and then obviously that was a sign of weakness, well, we have room over here, so this one I'm going to put it in so you see a little bit more. Let me enlarge a little. If you're watching on a mobile device, that would be easier, but then it would be a little bit more difficult to see the pattern somehow if we enlarge too much. That's last point of supply, and eventually that may be a selling climax. Well, I was referring to these high or tall volume bars to decide this may be the last point of supply, or like preliminary support, sorry. That's the PS, not PlayStation again, preliminary support. And then we had this automatic rally, let's say. So the question is, either we had this over here, because that's also high, a little bit high, and that's a bunch of continuous selling as well, and this was the automatic rally. So what would that be over here? That's another LPSY, that's another possibility. However, we know at this point the key thing is we're in the accumulation period. That's it. The key is that whether you move it up a bit and then call this another test, that's totally fine. So it doesn't change what we're trying to look at. So after this, we have this other test, and maybe we're seeing some sign of strength as well if that's the automatic rally. So the tricky part is, how do we decide whether we're seeing a sign of strength? If the automatic rally was here, this I won't consider the sign of strength. So one more reference I've taken, I would take would be this. If we also gauge the earlier accumulation cycle, so if we have this mega distribution that went on over there, and then it eventually declined to this point. So here, the funny or the interesting part was this green, very long green bar. Supposingly, let's say if that was the selling climax, I would assume this push would be the automatic rally. Yeah, so here we had, let's move it back to here after the selling climax, and then we had all these ups and downs, and eventually there was some more tests, and then here. So the thing over here, it's kind of tricky when we get to daily, right? So if we decide like this, then this part will look funny, because we know the second test, subsequent test would be lower than the selling climax itself, but then it's kind of make it. That's why in the beginning I said it's very noisy in the daily chart. The other way to look at this, of all these high fluctuations, you can call this actually, instead of here, I'll put it over there and then let the selling climax be here. This I would actually call that the preliminary support, where there are a bunch of crazy long candles in that period, and eventually, yeah, and then we reach the selling climax where the selling volume start to decline, the candles start to narrow the gap. So I'll look at it that way, and then we eventually had the sign of strength, and this is probably like the backup and last point of support. That's it. So that's how I will look at it. It's, yes, very subjective because of the noise in the daily chart. We see multiple pictures, so that's how it's getting tricky. So back to where we are now. Let's see how this accumulation finishes. So if there is a significant surge in volume, like, let me scroll it over here. So if this green bars down here in the volume chart starts to pick up, then maybe it's signaling this accumulation period is over, and there would be a little bit of surge between this yellow and white line. So let's see how far it goes. That's the daily Wyckoff that I've added based on the request I received in one of the comments. So